I'm joined this week by Tim Richardson from the Your Basket is Empty podcast. Welcome, Tim.
Thanks. It's great to be here, Ed.
Now I know we talk a lot at events, and I know you have some strong opinions on things. And I think this week we really wanted to get into kind of where the e-commerce market's going in 2024, and particularly around Shopify and its potentially unassailable lead. Before we get into that, I just want to remind everyone that you can ask a question as you go along. I've got a little ask a question mug just to remind you. And so we're happy to take any questions as we chat. Let's start there, Tim. I mean, I know you've worked a lot with Shopify in the past as in the agency and advising clients more recently. And do you see that they've been on a tear over the last few years? Do you see that sort of continuing? Are they effectively built up an unassailable lead as an e-commerce platform for the mid-market?
I think so. Yeah. Simple answer. I think in terms of the mid-market, I think what's interesting, and I'm on a panel with Shopify next week, and we're going to talk about it. And it's something I've discussed sort of at length. And I've been doing a bit of market mapping with a number of my clients, a number of my agency clients. And if you look at the mid-market, it's kind of, the market is broken into three kind of constituent parts, right? So startup, mid-market, and kind of enterprise, right? So startup and mid-market, on the outset, Shopify dominate. It's when you start to get a little bit deeper into that mid-market where it gets a little bit nuanced, right? So you can sort of start to break out that mid-market into kind of like the lower mid-market, the middle, and then the upper. Yeah. I would argue that Shopify still dominate the lower and the middle. It's the upper mid-market that's getting into the enterprise where it potentially probably doesn't have the dominance that they want, and that's what they're doing with hydrogen.
And in terms of GMV, what do you upper mid-market is roughly what to what?
Mate, it depends who you ask. Honestly, I've done a lot of research, and the way I look at it is, one, GMV shouldn't be the factor that you're looking at. What one should do is look at the market as a function of business maturity versus online revenue. Right. Now, if we were to have a look and sort of take the more traditional view, I would say the kind of like the lower mid-market is probably 5 to 15, 20 mil. The middle mid-market, maybe a little bit more than that. And then the upper mid-market is probably into your 100 mils. And then you get into the kind of enterprise world. Yeah. You ask somebody else, they'll give you some different figures, but that's kind of the way I look at it.
I mean, I know there's quite a lot of online threads about big commerce, and the hilariously low definition of enterprise, where, anyone doing more than, a few thousand orders a month is enterprise. But yeah, I think I agree with you. More than, I mean, I think it maybe upper mid-market maybe starts at 50 million plus, but it's that sort of 50 to 250 million type, and they're businesses with substantial numbers of people, sort of 50 to a few hundred people, but not enterprises of people, with thousands of employees globally and stuff.
Well, that's why I think the business maturity element is so important, right? Because you could have a hugely mature business, but their direct consumer, their online revenue is really small, but their overall revenue is really big. And I think that's kind of where it breaks down. Equally, and this is sort of starting to change, I think that the sort of tide is turning, that you have this incredibly strong pure play direct consumer brand that has, like a Gymshark, like hundreds of millions in terms of online revenue, but their business maturity is quite low. So I think that's why the business maturity kind of element is very, very useful when trying to identify these kind of like points within the market. But getting back to the original question, I do think Shopify dominates that mid-market and will continue to do so for kind of the next 10 years. I saw a really interesting talk from, I think, is it Bobby, the new CRO dude? He came over to London and he did a thing. It was like an agency thing. And I was there and I did a panel. And he spoke about the idea of like Shopify, we've got 3 different flavors that kind of spread throughout that market. We've got startup stuff, mid-market, now we've got enterprise. Now, you can pick holes in that. And once you get into the nuance, it's probably a little bit more complicated. But that's a very compelling argument from my perspective, right? Yeah. 3 flavors. And especially, I think, at a time when the macro sort of environment is very volatile, some of those upper mid-market / enterprise brands are looking to, reduce complexity in their stack. So therefore, they look at the other flavors, maybe not the startup one, but like that mid-market, and go, oh, this looks kind of interesting. So I think it's a very compelling argument. They own those first 2 segments and they're going after the other. That's not to say that there aren't competitors that can, eat into that share and currently are, etc.
Yeah, and I think you made a really good point, because I was saying I just don't know any brands that have moved off Shopify. I mean, I I just can't think, because obviously people moan about the fees and the percent cut for Shopify payments and stuff, but at a certain level that is negotiable. There's Shopify not going to lose you because you say, hey, I could get a 0.1% better deal elsewhere. And also, obviously, that slightly depends on geography, because obviously their Shopify payments are incredibly competitive in the US, where they have huge volume. The point someone was making to me is it's actually less competitive in places like France and Italy and Spain. The reason that Shopify doesn't have a big market share there is because Shopify payments is very uncompetitive rates-wise, and you're losing maybe a whole percentage point through being on them. But yeah, I think that you were saying that perhaps there are companies that maybe not converting to a Shopify, but winning new business from those upper mid-market level. Who do you see those sort of leaders?
Well, yeah, as they're going further into the kind of headless space, I think some of the stalwarts that operate in that market already, Salesforce Commerce Cloud, Hybris, Magento to some degree, I was chatting with a client of mine just before this call, and we were discussing the idea that I think within, especially the Salesforce Commerce Cloud and those other platforms that have got other bits of tech, they are very sticky. So brands that are kind of like potentially moving away from them, that's a much more difficult conversation to have. There is also some element, I think, people that sit on boards of those companies are interlinked between some of the tech that they use and all that sort of stuff. So there's a relationship thing that you need to get across. But I'm sure that there's a world in which a brand on Salesforce Commerce Cloud who are using the rest of their tech stack are getting very, very favorable rates on the commerce engine. So trying to pull them away from there is probably kind of difficult.
Well, and as I understand it from talking to some of Commerce Cloud's agencies, they don't really, Salesforce doesn't sell it on its own anymore, but they really only sell it as a solution, the cloud-wide solution. So you use Marketing Cloud, you use the Commerce Cloud, etc. And as you say, it's that although the tools are not hugely linked underneath, they're not really trying to pick off people just because they want the e-commerce bit of it.
And that's a hard thing for Shopify to try and do, right? To like pull them away from their entire stack just for this one particular element.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's the stalwarts, and I think Shopify are making grounds there. But that will be difficult. I think it's more of some of these like newer headless players that we were talking about before, right? Like the Centras, the commerce layers. There's some that seem to have gotten a lot of attention within the last couple of years, but have faded. Someone like a Fabric. There was another one that you mentioned. I know they weren't necessarily a platform, but like Nacelle. Yeah. So platforms like that. So there's a lot of VC dollars that kind of like went into this space. And I think, we're kind of getting into the headless conversation, but
let's do it.
That's where I think some of those platforms, especially, I talk a lot about Centra and Commerce Layer, and that's primarily because I know the teams there, and I think they both do great work and they're building great portfolios. But Centra in particular, I think, have got the opportunity to take on Shopify for the fashion vertical, specifically because what they've done is they own a vertical within a particular market. And then what they can do is roll into a new market with that portfolio. And that portfolio is incredibly strong. I'm pretty sure they've got COS, they've got big enterprise brands, and then they've got an entire market of very cool, very fashion-forward fashion brands, in their sales deck, right? So, and they seem to have done a good job strategically going after, say, Magento agencies and getting them to convert to Centra. So that brings more into their portfolio, builds a good relationship with those agencies. And what they're doing and have done, and this is the same as Commerce Layer, they've got brands like Raffo, if we're talking about the UK market specifically, they're starting to turn some of those brands, right? So big heritage, incredibly well-known brands coming onto their platform. And I think a key thing is, and this is both for agencies and platforms, right? I always see it that people talk a lot about their clients, and I think clients are great. Globally recognized brands is what other people look at. And it's what people look at when they see a portfolio board. And every single portfolio board you ever look at, right? There's always like 3 or 4 brands like, oh, yeah. And then there's a bunch you've never heard of.
Yeah.
Right. And so
everyone's got Nike, they've got
exactly. And Shopify can claim Nike now, even though many agencies across the world have been claiming it for the last 15 years. But I think Centra and Commerce Layer are probably ones that can take some dents. Specifically, I think Centra, because they've gone in vertically, they kind of own fashion in the Nordics, and now they're applying that go-to-market in the UK. They've got Paul Smith, but I'll stress that it's like a dent. I don't think they're going to they're denting Shopify, but I don't think they're going to overtake them anytime soon.
And as I say, it is also quite a European phenomenon. I think one of the things, You were saying Central pick up on a lot in their marketing, and I think be sensible too, because it's one of Shopify's weaknesses is the sort of international selling, the international markets piece. Traditionally on Shopify, you've had to basically run lots of different country storefronts to internationalize. That's kind of a headache to manage. I know they've launched Shopify Markets, which was a bit like, and then they launched Shopify Markets Pro, which is, I understand, basically a bit of a reskin of globally. And so I'm not clear that, that still seems to be a relative area of weakness. Maybe they'll get there in time, but it's picking off those sort of small but trading internationally brands is probably a good space for them.
I would say, yeah. And I think like a lot of platforms understand that, and that would be their kind of strategy. I think a couple of points on what you just mentioned there, and we were talking about before. One, Shopify do a great job at their product and brand marketing.
Yeah.
By far the best in the world. So they've got an uncanny ability to roll out, announcements at Shopify editions that are 90% potentially what they've rolled out in the previous one, but it seems far more impactful. And that is brilliant, right? So I think on the point of, internationalization specifically, I mean, it's the longest standing, criticism of Shopify for the last, 15 years that it can't handle international. And I think it's probably more difficult for them to do than what everyone understands. And I would argue, and we were talking about it before, for really complex international retailers, they're probably not right for Shopify anyway. So I'd be curious to see, like, in terms of their product roadmap, how much of the Markets Pro and now bringing in globally, how many problems does it solve versus what's the gap of requirements that they need to fill. I think that's getting shorter and is getting smaller and smaller. So the opportunity window for somebody like Accenture to tackle them on that front, there is a time limit on it, right? They will catch up, and they've got to be careful because Shopify develop at speed, as we've discussed.
Yeah, and I mean, there's two factors there. The first, they have an incredibly large R&D budget. I think the Gartner report I read in the summer says it's basically bigger than every other player in the space now. So although it's not all going to be spent efficiently, you've got to, if there is a feature that makes sense for a number of clients, you've got to back them to get there. And also, as you said earlier, like, they're very well aware they're trying to move up into the enterprise space, and therefore what are the kind of functionality sets they may not have focused on previously, but are needed to convince those people to move. I mean, they do have a weakness though. I mean, let's talk about the outage. They had a bit of a blip, unfortunately, just before Black Friday. I think it was about 43 minutes or something out,
something like that. Yeah.
I mean, it created sort of, again, from this Twitter storm thing. So everyone's like, "Oh, Shopify's got it down," but in context, that is still 99.99% uptime. And I was saying earlier, I just think the fact that you can actually, spot, diagnose, fix, and deploy within 42 minutes of fix is quite impressive in terms of sort of engineering responsiveness.
I think that piece was lost in the story.
Yeah.
I think it was easier for the naysayers, of which there are many, to focus on the downtime and not focus on the incredible ability to get it back up in 3/4 of an hour. That's quite impressive. I think what we were talking about before is really interesting, and obviously you guys are a part of this conversation, given what you do, of like, tech at scale, right? It must be really difficult, and you gave that really good example when we were chatting before about AWS and their particular data center that constantly has problems. Shopify are not the only, company to have these issues. I suppose in their particular world, what makes it more challenging, I suppose, if you look at different verticals and different businesses, AWS in a security world is very impactful. So if I've got some sort of bank and I'm using them for fraud protection or something that touches money, my money, it's going to raise concerns. And I think with Shopify, because they're powering a direct consumer channel and many of their brands, that's their main source of revenue, that goes down, then it's going to be very impactful, and then it becomes like a big news story. But
it's, as you say, it's hard. And I read a blog post on the Shopify Partners blog. I'll put it in the chat. About this, because we, as you say, have gone through this journey a little later, where we had actually going back to 2018 quite a major outage, and kind of thought it was resolved within sort of an hour. Everyone went home, like, job done. And then we hadn't really got to the root cause, so it rolled on for the day. And I think learning about that, we learned that actually it's super important to really boil down to the root cause, like how can we make this not? And it means, multiple layers of redundancy. It means having an incredibly well understood actual policies and communication internally. It means doing sensible stuff about not shipping on a Friday. And I think that was actually probably the biggest point made in some of the criticism, which is absolutely true, because a lot of the agencies and brands are used to this, right? You don't ship stuff in peak season. Like, just don't do it. Like, there's only one possible outcome there, and it's down.
But that might speak to which we were talking about before. I suppose maybe one of Shopify's great advantages and unique selling propositions is that R&D budget and the ability to ship quick.
Yep.
And frequently, and that's probably the downside, right? If you're shipping a lot, then you might going to do it and schedule it before a peak season, and So I mean, I would argue, like, to sort of play devil's advocate slightly, a big part of the market is crying out for and accusing them of not being able to facilitate international markets to the degree that they need. But at the same time, they don't like them shipping as quickly as they do, because they're going to do that in a peak season. So, they're between a rock and a hard place. Pick one.
If you want enterprise monolith and never changes, then, don't expect any functionality.
Exactly.
If you want agile, feature shipping, then don't expect no breakages. I mean, I do understand, actually going back to sort of one of Shopify's Achilles heels from a technical point of view, they have, obviously, because they actually started the platform, a dozen years ago. The actual main database is basically a monolithic database, which means that they actually, one change can break for everyone globally. And that is actually a limitation of being able to ship. So I think it's actually one of the reasons why it looks harder from the inside than it does from the outside to make some of these improvements, because it actually means core schema changing the database, which could exactly do what happened. So I think, as you say, it's a really tough thing. People are saying, why couldn't you just fix the stuff? But obviously fixing stuff involves a potentially breaking change that might go down. So yeah.
How would you advise them on that then? Like, what's the solution? Like, should a larger proportion of their R&D budget be sort of funneled to recalibrating the internal structure? And
I think probably exactly. If they don't, I think in the long term, over a few years, they'd probably be crazy not to, because everything's solvable with money. I think they probably need to address that, effectively, maybe rebuild quite a lot in the background. But I think, but honestly, because we've had this internally, I'm honestly on the side of move fast and break things. I think it's more likely that they're scarred by the experience and then pull back from the product roadmap. And that's actually to everyone's detriment. So I'm generally, if I was advising them, I'd say, look, honestly, 99.99 is okay. People won't, they're not going to leave the platform just for that.
Well, it goes back to your point before about people leaving the platform. I mean, these sort of things, you got loads of news, and to be honest, so I talk about e-commerce news every couple of weeks in a newsletter, and I struggle to fill the newsletter with stuff. This is not an area full of interesting news. I hate to burst everyone's bubble. Our lovely community.
Because that shit doesn't happen. It's incredibly reliable.
And exactly. So to be honest, this was big news because I think, and I mentioned it in my newsletter, I think it's bigger news because, and it speaks more to the interest of e-com news cycles than it does maybe to the stability of platforms. But I think it's a good news story. And ultimately, I would be very keen to see how many brands moved away from Shopify, because this, I'd say, is very, very, very low. A lot of them would have kicked up a fuss because they lost money. Totally get it. But
Really not going to re-platform SLAs, and they can claw some of it back. But it is, for a tiny outage like that, is globally it does cost Shopify money. Absolutely. I mean, I think they had another. I remember writing about it, but I think back in 2022 they had a checkout outage, security problem for longer than that, like half a day. And that that did cost them like $500 million. It's not insubstantial. But anyway, let's get back to headless. We skipped over that, but I think it's a really interesting topic. So I mean, the sort of brief history here is that 2021 headless was this new great thing. It was going to transform the world of e-commerce, whole new wave, particularly exciting for agencies who could basically convince their clients to rebuild at huge cost their sites. And then 2022, some of the projects, sort of putting along, seem to be sticky weather. And then 2023, a lot of stories have come out with people saying it didn't work at all. We never deployed. We rolled back. Better abandon the project. Where do you think that's going in 2024? Where do you see the role of headless and for those particularly those upper mid-market brands?
So yeah, I work with a headless agency called Rotate, who have been doing this for more than 10 plus years. So the fact that they've been doing it for more than 10 plus years and continuing to go incredibly strongly, that there is a market for it.
Yeah.
So they're not the only headless agency or, primarily headless agency in the world. So there is certainly a market for it. I think, we were discussing before we jumped on whether, was it a bit of a hype cycle, or does this follow the kind of general Gartner or consultancy curve of the pit of despair or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, time will tell, I think, on that front. In terms of predictions, I think, unfortunately, I think with a lot of this stuff, VC funded whatever has had a very tough time of late. And I think, let's look at other big investments that have been made across the world in the last 2.5 years. I think there's more utility in headless than there is crypto, generally speaking. And I think we can agree that that is true. I think that our world is just consumed by AI now. So all of that like oxygen has been sucked up from one place and then just deployed elsewhere. So I think there's probably an element of that, right? Like there's loads of people with loads of money looking to spend it and put it somewhere, and it happened to go into this piece of technology.
Well, and absolutely, I agree with you there. So to obviously the point about 2021, it was an absolute e-commerce boom post-COVID. Anything that sort of, if people came along with a basic VC pitch that, hey, these people are spending mega dollars on e-commerce and therefore the brands are going to want to invest in better tech, and this is the better tech, that got investment.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the interesting thing is, the problem that it's trying to solve. So, I mean, I guess, from what I understand, there's sort of three problems that headless might solve over a kind of standard theme. The first is the sort of speed thing. It's going to be faster, and Amazon's research says faster storefronts are better converting. The second is the kind of functionality that, like you're not going to get this particular bit with Shopify, but you can build that yourself through the APIs. And the third thing is the kind of tight control over the design, branding, user interface. Now, maybe take the second thing first. I mean, you made a really interesting point to me earlier that people who bet on doing something, basically fixing a gap with Shopify's current functionality by doing it all custom, are basically betting against product Shopify's ability to ship stuff fast. And as we just agreed, they ship stuff fast. So one of the problems with headless is they do it to fix a gap that is then resolved by Shopify within a year. But the headless project takes more than a year to roll out. So by the time they actually finish it, they could have just moved back to a normal storefront and got the same thing.
Exactly. So I think you touch, and I think broadly speaking, they are probably the reasons to move. And I think if you take a further step back, it's ultimately about complexity, right? If you've got a really complex business, you probably need a complex solution, right? And headless is not necessarily complex solution, but it's built in a way, or it's a way in which you can pull together all of the best of the stuff and create your own thing, right? Like that's great. But I think once you dig into the detail, like one could argue that you get away with a lot of that functionality, speed, and design in Shopify core anyway. And then you've got to take into account the development of Shopify and their roadmap kind of like execution, and is it catching up? So, however, getting back to the original question, is there a market for headless in 2024? 100%. Was there too much overinvestment in those technologies in 2021? Clearly, yes. Clearly, yes. Given that a lot of them have like died away, we haven't heard from them in like over a year. But getting back to some of our points about Centra headless platform, they're doing really well, and they're taking some some of the air out of Shopify's market. So I think broadly speaking, there is a market for it. I don't necessarily subscribe to the idea, we talked about it before, that like people made or were sort of coerced into these very stupid decisions to go into headless and then they're going back. Like that's obviously a thing. I think at the time people thought it was a good idea, and people at brands are not stupid. They wouldn't have gotten into these sort of projects if they didn't think there was kind of,
I'm a bit cynical on one point, which is that they because they're more complex, for the agency, they're much higher value projects. So I do think there's a lot of incentive as an agency to sell your brand a headless build just because of the extra man hours.
So I reckon potentially, I think it's probably more a function of those agencies are primarily made up of technical people, and technical people like building on it, and so they're more tribal to a technical solution. So I unfortunately, I don't think agencies are that commercially astute. I wish they were, and they should come and work with me if they want to be. But like that commercial astuteness, I don't think was probably as much part of the argument as them being really technical people and saying, hey, this is a really, really good technical solution. We like building technical stuff. That's where it should be. But I mean, look, you take, I know from experience, like an agency like Rotate would never, ever, ever, suggest a headless project to somebody that it was not right for them, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's going to burn their reputation, right?
Yeah.
They're a service business, right?
Yeah.
So they're going to suggest something that's not good, then it's going to come back and burn it. But like, get back to the original question. Yeah, look, I think headless has definitely got legs. I think probably rounding it out, it's probably just going to be a bit more niche for a little bit longer than what everyone had predicted.
Yeah.
Will we go into a world in which all websites are headless? Maybe, maybe not. You made a good point before of like, do we go into a world in which there is more React front end than we have now? Probably. That's probably where more of the general direction of travel is going. But does that mean you need a fully headless or composable kind of architecture in order to do that? Maybe not. You use Shopify, right? So
that's exactly what I believe. I think that, it's really interesting you make the point that, technical agencies want to work with new tech. And I think that one of the problems with Liquid is it's basically, a legacy tech now. So I think a lot of the agencies and actually front-end developers of the brands would far rather work with React. And as I said, I think Toby could recognize this. He's an engineer himself, and that's kind of why he got excited about Hydrogen and actually bought a kind of React server-side framework to do that. I can't remember what's going on, but yeah. So I do think that's going to happen. And in fact, that may just be what what the market wanted, was just a different framework to build the same experience in. And Hydrogen definitely provides that. What was really interesting was also a post I put in the chat as well, which was from Shopify's own sort of engineering blog last month, which actually showed that, if you look at real world performance, as in actually how long it, sampling lots of end users' browsers, Liquid storefronts are generally faster than Hydrogen ones, and basically way faster than the likes of Magento and whatever. Which I think everyone knew that, but I think the interesting thing is that I guess it probably just means two things. It means, first of all, most people implement headless and Hydrogen badly. I'm sure that's true because it's a new tech and people don't know how to get the best out of it. I'm not actually sure it's necessarily slower. I just think it might be a basic point about the fact that to get it right requires a bit more technical expertise. That the good thing about Shopify's out-the-box storefront, their Liquid themes, is that it's kind of impossible to get wrong. Shopify stop you from doing silly things. Look, we're all about speed of the data. We spend a lot of time with our own tracking scripts trying to make them highly performant, both for, we support headless and Shopify storefront. So I think it's possible to do more, as I said, with a standard storefront. So I kind of agree with you. I think it'll be niche. I think some people will still do headless. I think Hydrogen, though, is going to take the lion's share of that, rather than, another custom platform.
I think, and I think that has been proved. I think one thing we can agree on is are new headless platforms going to attract the VC money that they had in 2021, and therefore is that a function of success and then being able to grow? And that has been proven to be incorrect. So I would say that the money and investment is going to go into Shopify and platforms like Centra, who are competing with them, and Commerce Layer and all the guys that are still kind of around and kicking. It'll remain as a bit of a niche thing for a little bit longer.
Yeah. And as a quick plug for Littledata, if you are working with headless storefront, we've got a guide to how to set that up. And that's because we do server-to-server tracking. It still works even if you don't have the storefront. Cool. Well, we've covered quite a lot there. I guess sort of final notes. What are your sort of general e-commerce predictions for 2024? Do you have a sort of feel of like where the market's going?
So this is my prediction, and there's another great headless. They're not primarily headless, but a great agency. They're a Centra agency out of Sweden called Greben, and they asked me to do a blog, and then Will and I on the pod we talked about this on Monday. My big prediction or suggestion for 2024 is get back to basics. don't worry about all of this shiny shit. Just get back to basics. And if you're a brand, just get back to basics. Focus on the product and your marketing, which are kind of the same thing. Focus on things like post-purchase experience. It's a massive low-hanging fruit. Don't expect me to have a printer. Please don't expect me to have a printer. Just real basic stuff, right? And then on the agency front, get back to basics, like focus on your positioning, remove all the copy and the fluff that most agencies do. Create a strategic partner program, keep that partner program really small, and you'll win. Simple as that.
Yeah, no, I mean, that very much chimes with the data, because that's, I think, our feeling as well, is that there's a lot of initiatives. I think, as you say, that the problem of working in a fast-moving market where there's lots of new initiatives, tech partners going on, is there's constantly another thing to look at, right, and another shiny new thing. And I think we've just realized that actually we can do less to achieve more. You don't need to actually be working with everyone. You don't need to integrate with everything.
Totally.
Provide a very an excellent core product that works extremely well for the niche that you're in. That's the way it needs to happen. And be prepared, actually, to turn away people who aren't fit with that. I think that's certainly true for agencies, right? People are too scared. Totally. There was a brilliant, my head of marketing forwarded me a brilliant post yesterday, actually, about that, saying, but by someone in a similar position to yourself who advises lots of agencies in the US, and saying that, everyone agrees when he surveys them that niche would be better, as in they'd get shorter time to close deals and more cut through. But no one has the balls to actually do it, because it's the
discipline. You got to be super disciplined. Yeah. And that's like everything in life, right? Like diet, exercise, whatever, not smoking, not drinking, got to be disciplined. That's the key. I'm not saying that's easy, and getting back to basics is not easy, but that's my prediction for 2024.
Very good. Well, thank you, Tim. It's been a pleasure, and hope you have a lovely weekend, and I'll be chatting to you soon, no doubt.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me, mate. That's great.